So it's come to my attention that there's some haters in the fantasy race community of the elves. And I don't understand why that is. I don't know if it's because they're usually portrayed as pompous or, I don't know, too slender or something. I don't know, whatever. Not sure what the hate is with the elves. I think the gnome hate is warranted because why do you like gnomes? They're just small. Anyways, we're going to be doing elf race tier list in video games. That way you can distinguish what's considered a good depiction of elves in games and a bad depiction. So it's not going to actually involve things like Lord of the Rings or any other sort of media like TV or books. Strictly gaming. The only exception here is D&D, which is going to be the first one I'm going to tackle out at the park because it has a lot of video games based on the D&D structure, I guess. So first up, obviously, we have D&D, which is kind of like the granddaddy of elves in modern video games. Has lots of versatility and lore with their elves. There's a lot of like sub-races and stuff like drows, which you see in current media today. Lots of inspiration taken from Dungeons and Dragons. So next up we have Warcraft. And Warcraft has kind of a cool take with elves because there's so many offshoots. You have the Night Elves, you have the Blood Elves, you have the High Elves. My personal favorite, though, is the Nightborn. They're basically elves that are drug addicts to mana sources. They make wine out of mana. Pretty cool. They're dying, basically, if they don't get their mana fix. A tier. Definitely A tier. Next one, we have Golden Axe. And Golden Axe has those freaking thieves that just steal everything from you. And that's the only thing you see in Golden Axe when you see an elf. So I can't even judge them on other things that they do other than steal my stuff. Fuck that guy. D tier. Moving on, we have the elves in Elf Bowling. And they're even worse. Let's take a look here. We have Santa Claus, and he's bowling with the elves as pins. They're basically just cowards. Why don't you revolt against Santa Claus and retake your throne that's rightfully yours? You're like magical beings. What are you doing? You're like being slaves to this guy. Absolutely awful. Get into F tier. So stupid. Man. Okay, RuneScape. As you can tell, that's not the best logo that I chose for it. But RuneScape, they're pretty normal elves. There's nothing really too out of the ordinary with their depiction. I think they do their job perfectly. They do have a cool elf god, though, that's got like 4 eyes, and she's blue and has like scaly torso. Kind of cool. So a little bonus point there. But I would say C tier for RuneScape. Gauntlet. I only remember one character in the Gauntlet games, and it was just that elf ranger guy. But he was pretty cool. Stereotypical elf, like stealthy kind of guy. I bet if he's cool, his relatives are cool, based on the transitive property. So I would say the Gauntlet elves, probably C tier. Zelda. Zelda doesn't necessarily have something you would call an elf. They have the Kokiri, and they have the Hylians, and they're definitely based off elves, but I still put them on the list because I still consider them to be elves. And they have their own charm, and they have pretty cool culture. They're not like your average run-of-the-mill elves, so it's nice to see like an Eastern take on elves because most elven media, I guess, is very Western based, kind of like off D&D and stuff. So I would put Zelda in the B tier. They have a pretty cool take on elves. Next one is Kingdoms of Amalur. That's a one-off game. One of my favorites, actually. So I put it on the list just out of bias. But Kingdoms of Amalur had basically 2 kinds of elves. You had the bad elves, more so accurate, the mischievous elves. And then you have the do-gooder elves that you could consider good, bad and good, not necessarily confined to that, but they're nothing too unique. And they got pretty cool designs, though. I really like what they did with the designs of the characters. And they eventually learned to fight together for a common good. So I would put them in B tier. Great game, by the way. Rest in peace. Elder Scrolls. So I don't really like where the series went off from there, but the take on elves that they've always had was always really cool to me. I really liked the Dunmer elves in Elder Scrolls, and I really found their architecture and ways of living, like the Silt Striders, really cool. I don't know. I guess I don't really care for the elf designs, but everything else is really cool, and they put a lot of thought into it, which I really like. So, not too much eye candy there. They're kind of ugly. I'd put them in B tier, though. Very cool take on elves. You know what? Let's put them in A tier. Yeah, I'd put them like around Warcraft elves. Pretty awesome. Next one is Kingdoms Under Fire, which, on the contrary of Elder Scrolls, they're your generic eye candy elves. They wear very revealing armor. They don't really have much else going for them. Maybe they're generic elves. I didn't really care too much, but obviously you knew what they were going for, so I will put that in D tier. Moving on, we have the Divinity Elves, which are one of my favorites as well. They're pretty damn awesome. I think the one thing that always stuck out to me for the Divinity Elves is they can eat flesh and gain the memories of whatever flesh they ate. So if they were to eat another elf and enact cannibalism, they would basically get all their memories and stuff, and that could cause some really cool gameplay elements in the games. And it really is a sticking out feature for the elves and can really translate into things like story and stuff. Pretty cool. I would put Divinity Elves in A tier. Pretty awesome. Next up we got Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is kind of hard to categorize because there's so many different renditions of races in Final Fantasy, so there's too many elves to list. But I think like on a median, they're usually like C tier maybe. I don't know. Never really stuck out to me. Either they were kind of boring or yeah, they could be kind of cool. So we'll just leave it at that, C tier. I think that's a fitting place for them. Next up, we have Dragon Age elves. Who are pretty cool. They actually revolt against their masters, unlike these elves down here in F tier. Dragon Age, I kind of like their story. They have like the enslaved elves in the wild that have spite against human beings, obviously, because you've enslaved their family. They kind of got a cool story going for them. Nothing too, they didn't really knock it up an extra notch, I would say, but I think it was a very solid rendition of elves. So I'll put Dragon Age in B tier. Now Monster Hunter does not actually have elves per se. Now we're kind of going to the back of the barrel. Monster Hunter has these things called wyverns, I forgot. Anyways, they have pointed ears, and I think that's good enough to be put on the elf tier list. They descended from wyverns, and they basically can give you free vegetables. From those old guys that you see in Monster Hunter, those are wyverns. They give you free vegetables, and I would put them in C tier because they're not really elves, and they're not too interesting, but I can't argue with free food, so I'm putting Monster Hunter in B tier. Next one up is Fire Emblem, which is kind of on the same boat, except they kind of kicked it up a notch, and they can turn into dragons. They're called Manakete. Pretty sure I butchered the pronunciation, so I would put them in B tier. And then finally we have Elf Bowling Collector's Edition. And not only did they ruin these elves' lives in the first game, they basically are capitalizing off their suffering one more time in a collector's edition. Now I just feel bad for them, and I will put them into D tier. Now I would say that's a pretty definitive list, tier list for elves. These are mostly just series that I've played or know of the elves. So you don't see things like the Tales of series or EverQuest or Warhammer. Yeah, so that's basically my list. It's pretty objective. Can't really argue with it. So if you have any questions of elf lore, feel free to leave anything in the comments and I'll get back to you when I can. Thank you. Lucky. Hi.